Very good evening to everyone. I'm Paul Mavor, the Chief Pharmacist from Health House, and I'm joined today by pharmacist Dunja Hadziomerovic, also from Health House, cannabis economist Rhys Cohen from Freshleaf Analytics, and Dr Orit Holtzman from Compass Lifestyle Clinics. And by way of disclaimer, I want to make it absolutely clear we're not here promoting CBD as a medicine for you. We're discussing the proposed regulation changes by the TGA, which we'll talk about shortly. So if you do have any medical issues, please discuss them with your healthcare professional. The actual TGA initiated a proposed rescheduling for CBD or cannabidiol. It finished last week for comment on Friday 22nd of May, and so far there's no indication of positive or negative responses, though I did ask the TGA before this webinar. They'll be published in due course on their website, and they're generally pretty efficient at putting them up. There were four main conditions with regards to the proposed rescheduling, maximum dose being 60 milligrams and pack sizes of only 30 days supply. The CBD needs to be 98% pure, and the other cannabinoids can be comprise up to 2%. It is for sale only to adults only, not for kids, and excludes recreational or cannabis for veterinary use. And meanwhile, anything for children in higher doses remains in Schedule 4 or Schedule 8, where it contains more than 2% THC. So it happens quite a bit with medicines over time that their scheduling might change as the safety or efficacy is better established. And a prime example of this is ibuprofen, which was first introduced in 1969 as a prescription medicine, was then available over the counter after 1983, and in more recent times it's now available from supermarkets and or petrol stations, etc. And there's other drugs such as codeine have been moved the other way from being available over the counter for the last couple of years, being upscheduled to prescription only to minimise harm. And funnily enough, another drug at the same time this amendment is going through the same thing, that it's a proposal to downschedule sildenafil, also known as Viagra, which is commonly used for erectile dysfunction. But I do think that the downscheduling of sildenafil compared to CBD is a lot harder proposition and is going to face some stiff competition from its critics. Boom, boom. Sorry, I had to put that in there. I'm really keen to see some of the other submissions for the scheduling change proposal. But the one big group who issued a press release and received a lot of media publicity about it is the Australian Medical Association, or the AMA. They, unsurprisingly, oppose this proposed amendment. They don't think there is enough efficacy, even though the TGA has released a reference review in April, basically saying lower doses were safe and well tolerated. If you get a chance, please read the TGA's submission. It basically explains a lot and why they have downscheduled in this fashion. Another big reason CBD has been downscheduled is CBD is widely sold over the counter in many other Western countries, such as the UK, parts of Europe, Canada, and the US. And this particular screenshot is from Boots, UK, where they've got about 40 different types of CBD available on their website for sale without a prescription, as a prime example. So on to our first speaker, consultant pharmacist Dunja Hadziomerovic. She's from Health House, and she'll explain more about the safety and efficacy of cannabidiol. Thank you very much.
All right. Hi, I'm Dunja. So I'm one of the pharmacists that works from Health House, and we distribute medicinal cannabis to all states of Australia. And tonight I'll just cover some of the clinical considerations of using CBD, so particularly from the perspective of the patient taking a medicinal form, and then also from the perspective of the healthcare team because we're going to be dealing with patients with chronic conditions. And so within the management plan, it's a good idea to also learn about the adverse effects of CBD, the precautions, the contraindications, and interactions with other medications, so that we're all aware before this change even occurs. So here we go. I'll start off with talking a little bit about what psychoactivity, or whether CBD is psychoactive. What that really means is when a drug affects the mind or the behavior. So things like when patients experience sedation, euphoria, psychosis, or changes in the mental alertness, that's all termed within that umbrella. CBD is actually not capable of doing such an effect because of its molecular structure. So the important receptor that people might ask about is CB1, which is normally located in the central nervous system. And because of the way it binds partially to that receptor, it affects the final result, which may be euphoria or anxiety if that receptor is activated. So it pretty much prevents the action of, say, THC, for example, in this case. The second thing a lot of health professionals would likely worry about during this change is the proposal of whether CBD would be dependent or if it could be abused by patients. So firstly, I'll recap what dependence means. If, for example, you have, say, for example, a drug of 10 milligram that is normally taken initially by a patient, dependence would be referred to as the physical dependence of the substance. So over time, the patient might build up a tolerance of the drug, to the drug, I should say, and then they might need, say, for example, 60 milligrams of it to have that same initial effect as that first dose. So that patient would be dependent on that substance, and they'd experience likely a strong desire for wanting more. And also when you withdraw the drug from their system, they're very likely to experience some of those withdrawal side effects. So the important thing that I would also suggest, if you want to read a little bit more about CBD and how it works and this dependence potential, the World Health Organization has already summarized it nicely for us in 2018, and they collected studies from humans, and they concluded that there was no reports of dependence of cannabidiol or CBD. So that includes withdrawal and tolerance. What about the potential for it to be abused? That might be the second question as well. So when patients, that's more when patients' intentions are to seek out a prescribed or recreational form of the drug and to experience that desired effect. So for example, that euphoric effect. But again, the answer is no. And that's also based on the human studies that the World Health Organization concluded with. Some of the adverse effects that I'll just touch upon as well, if patients do take CBD over the counter, are listed here. But from a clinical perspective, actually, with this low dose that is proposed, it's super unlikely. A lot of this will happen at a higher end. So we're talking about, for example, 10 to 20 milligram per kilo per day. And one thing to remember is also that the increase in dose usually results in the increase in adverse effects. But the interesting thing about CBD is that it might have this biphasic response. So at a low dose of CBD, some patients will complain about being a little bit alert, but a high dose causes that drowsiness. So that's one thing to take into consideration as well. With the interactions, I'll touch upon a little bit of these. I wish I could talk a little bit more about what and why, but basically, if you think about CBD as a lipophilic molecule, it's going to accumulate in the liver and it's going to be metabolized through this CYP450 pathway. There's a particular few enzymes that it might inhibit, so I've just written those down here. The interaction is weak though, and that's pretty much because we haven't done enough research in terms of exactly which ones will interact with the others. And a lot of the research that is out there is actually on animals still. So that's one thing I'll stress when you do see patients on some of these medications. It's important to monitor, but it doesn't mean that they can't be on CBD. With the precautions and contraindications, in summary, there actually isn't any official document in Australia yet to say that certain conditions are contraindicated with CBD. One thing we know is that with this proposal, you have to consider the age of the patient, so they have to be 18 years or above to supply it over the counter and then counsel. But I will mention with pregnancy and breastfeeding that there isn't enough evidence or reliable evidence, I should say, to take cannabidiol. When I talked about the World Health Organization, that report said that they found no effect on the embryonic development, for example, but again, there was limited research done on that. And with breastfeeding, in terms of breast milk, it's very likely that CBD would enter the milk because it's lipophilic, but there's no data yet to suggest how long it would remain in the milk or what sort of effect it would have on the infant. And then the third thing to consider is that liver dysfunction, particularly with the way CBD is metabolized and eliminated. So a lot of patients that do have liver impairment or they're co-administering certain medications at the same time, that's one thing to monitor because possibly there's more likelihood of those drug interactions. So in summary, the dose we're talking about that is proposed is very low, 1 milligram per kilo per day and a maximum of 60 milligram per day. It's going to be through the oral route and it has really good safety and tolerability. The other thing is to consider the age of the patient, so it has to be a patient 18 years or above. And the biggest thing is that CBD is not psychoactive and is already being prescribed a lot in driving, in terms of patients wanting to drive, I should say, so that's fine. And there is no evidence of dependence or abuse. Thanks for listening. That's my bit.
Thank you very much, Dunja. I now invite our next speaker, Dr Orit Holtzman. She's a Sydney-based GP who has an interest in integrative medicine and medicinal cannabis. If you want to join us.
Hi. Thank you, Paul. Just to clarify, I'm not a GP. I'm a functional medicine doctor and cannabis clinician at Campus Lifestyle Clinic. And thank you for having me here today, Paul. Thank you, Dunja, for the wonderful presentation. I'll just share my screen as well. All right. Okay, so we all have quite a short time for presentation today, so I will really touch briefly a little bit about CBD and then about the AMA perspective and my perspective on the DAO scheduling. So Dunja has done a wonderful job with presenting some of this information already, so I'll just recap. So cannabidiol CBD interacts with the endocannabinoid system. I'm not going to go into too much details since I can spend a few hours speaking about the endocannabinoid system, but two of the main receptors in the endocannabinoid system are CB1 and CB2. CB1 is mostly located in the brain and peripheral nervous system, although there are receptors in other organs as well. CB2, there are some receptors in the brain, but mostly on immune cells, in the bone, and in other organs as well. CBD has a low affinity to CB1, which is why it does not have any psychoactive effects. And it's also an agonist, inverse agonist or antagonist at the CB2 receptor, which, as Dunja already mentioned, means that it possibly modulates the psychoactive effects of THC. It also increases the concentrations of an endocannabinoid anandamide that might compete with THC as well, and by which reducing the psychoactive effects of THC. CBD, however, exerts most of its actions via interactions with other receptors, not necessarily CB1 and CB2. So again, I'm going to go over this very quickly. So it's an agonist at the TRPV1 cation channels, which exerts some of its analgesic effects. It's an allosteric modulator of receptors of the mu delta opioids, the D2 dopamine receptors, GABA receptors, glycine receptors, and this modulates its neuroprotective, antidepressant, and anxiolytic effects. It's also an agonist at the serotonergic 5-HT1A receptors, which may be the mechanism by which it regulates stress response and compulsive behavior, and also the mechanism by which it exerts anti-emetic effects, so relieving nausea. It's also an agonist of the PPAR gamma receptor, which modulates more of its analgesic effect, neuroprotective, neuronal function modulation, and anti-inflammatory, metabolic, anti-tumor, gastrointestinal, and cardiovascular effects. It's also an antagonist at the GPR55 receptor, that is a proliferative receptor, and by which it can help with osteoporosis or bone resorption, seizure control, inflammation, and neuropathic pain. So you can see that CBD is quite a magical molecule that may have many beneficial effects on the human body. So to summarize, the actions of CBD is it's an analgesic, anti-inflammatory, neuroprotective, anticonvulsant, anti-emetic, antioxidant, anti-proliferative, anti-anxiolytic, and antidepressant, and also immune modulatory, which may mediate its effect on autoimmune disease. Now, what clinical indications can CBD be used for? So this is the list that I've copied from the TGA portal. So these are indications to which this CBD has already been approved for submissions to the TGA. So this is not low dose necessarily. It's just CBD in general. So these clinical indications are Alzheimer's dementia, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, anorexia, anxiety, atopic dermatitis, autism, cancer pain and symptom management, chemotherapy-induced vomiting, chronic pain, depression, dystonia, epilepsy, insomnia, multiple sclerosis, nausea, Parkinson's disease, PTSD, restless leg syndrome, rheumatoid arthritis, spasticity, Tourette syndrome, and ulcerative colitis. So we can see that those are quite numerous. And those are indications that TGA assessed that there may be enough evidence that CBD can be beneficial for. However, as I mentioned, this is CBD in any dose and not just limited to low-dose CBD. For the purpose of this rescheduling, only low-dose CBD is considered. So the dose that is considered for downscheduling to Schedule 3 is CBD in a dose of less or equal to 1 milligram per kilo a day, up to 60 milligram per day. So the TGA has reviewed the current evidence for low-dose CBD, and they came to the conclusion that there is enough evidence to show that CBD in a low dose may be beneficial for chronic and generalized pain of broad etiologies through both systemic and localized administration as a topical transdermal solution, also for management of anxiety and insomnia. it is important to note that the recommended daily dose is based on weight and therefore is limited to evidence about the safety profile for low-dose CBD in an essentially an adult population. So we don't have the evidence to show that this low dose is efficacious or safe in children. All right, now there was a request for submissions for opinions about this downscheduling proposal by the TGA, and the Australian Medical Association has made its position public. So the AMA opposes the proposal to make CBD products with at least 98% CBD and 0.2% or less of THC an unscheduled product that is listed, assessed, listed, or registered medicine on the ARTG. And they also oppose the proposal to make a Schedule 3 entry for CBD products with a maximum daily dose of 60 milligrams per day. According to the AMA, the use of medicinal cannabis should remain largely restricted to clinical trials and in the hands of a small group of approved prescribers. So this is even more limited, really, than the current situation, as any registered medical practitioner can apply for approval to the TGA to prescribe medicinal cannabis. So they suggest that it's appropriate largely in the palliative care of pediatric settings for palliative control of chronic pain and management of intractable epilepsy in children. They are concerned that CBD products, that the downscheduling of CBD products sends the wrong message to the public, and that there is a risk of normalizing the concept that cannabis is a good therapeutic product without established evidence to support it, and potentially dissuade use of products with a genuine evidence-based for benefit. And the prescription-only CBD will ensure that it is used only for evidence-based indication. So to summarize, while the AMA support the review of regulatory barriers for prescribing, and the TGA has established that low CBD is safe, the AMA does not believe that CBD use is at the stage where it should be freely available as a therapeutic, complementary substance or as a Schedule 3 medicine. They believe that patients should consult a medical practitioner if they are experiencing medical condition that may be alleviated from medicinal cannabis use, and that the high potential for drug-drug interaction require monitoring by a medical practitioner. Finally, efficacy for specific medical conditions need to be established. So this is the position of the AMA. So what is my perspective of this? So I am a medicinal cannabis prescriber. I'm an authorized prescriber. I have more than 200 patients under my care for prescription of medicinal cannabis. So my perspective is based on my personal view and research. It's my opinion only, and it doesn't construe any medical advice, of course. So I want to, just want to go back. This. Okay, so I just want to address, I guess, a few of the points that were raised by the AMA position. So they view that the downscheduling sends the wrong message, that cannabis is a good therapeutic product without established evidence. However, we've seen that there is quite a good amount of evidence to support the use of medicinal cannabis for certain indications. There has been a large review in 2017 that reviewed more than 10,000 studies, and they came to the conclusion that there is considerable and substantial evidence for the management for chronic pain, and also for the management of spasticity in MS. So I'm not sure why the AMA does not consider this evidence as sufficient. And the current review by the TGA came to the same conclusion, that there is evidence that supports the use of medicinal cannabis, and in this case specifically CBD, for the conditions of pain, anxiety, and insomnia. Now, they claim the prescription CBD, only CBD, will ensure that is used only for evidence-based indication. That is, of course, true. However, if it is a pharmacy-only medication, a pharmacist will review the indication that the patient is presenting for and will advise whether the CBD is appropriate for this indication or not. Now, another one of their points is that the patient should consult a medical practitioner if they're experiencing medical conditions that may be alleviated from medicinal cannabis use. And of course, a patient should consult medical practitioner if they have a medical problem that can benefit from seeing a medical practitioner. However, I believe we do need to trust the public and that they know that they should contact a medical doctor when is appropriate. If they don't wish to do so, if CBD is not available, they would probably turn to other products such as other herbs or supplements that may be helpful as they perceive in their condition. Now, another concerns of the AMA is the high potential of drug-drug interaction. As Dunja has reviewed, interactions are possible. However, in a low dose, they are quite unlikely. And again, the pharmacist should be aware of those interactions and review the patient's other medication and alert them of the possible interactions. Finally, efficacy for specific medical conditions need to be established. So we've already discussed this. Of course, the evidence can be improved upon. There are many clinical trials underway, but there is some evidence already. Some of it is quite high quality. So as the TGA has reviewed, and this evidence actually supports the use of CBD for certain conditions. However, that is not saying that there are not any possible issues or potential issues with downscheduling of CBD. So one issue is there may be side effects for the use of CBD. Again, however, with a low dose, they are not very severe and not very common. Drug interactions are possible, and it is very important that the patient will be aware of the drug interactions that are possible and will consult a pharmacist. Now, a potential issue that I can see is the issue of suboptimal management. So there is a huge variety of products available, and it can be quite a difficult thing to choose the most beneficial product for a certain person. Medicinal cannabis is a highly individualized medicine, and so my hope is that even though CBD will be available behind the counter, people would still find it appropriate to see a healthcare practitioner to help them with selecting the right product, selecting the right dose, and the dosing and titration process. Also, some people might benefit from a higher dose than the 60 milligram that is available from over the counter. Additionally, medicinal cannabis is more than just CBD. So THC, from my experience and from the evidence, is a valuable therapeutic molecule. And some patients can benefit greatly from a product that does contain more than 0.2% THC. I do hope that the public will be aware that if they tried CBD and they didn't receive the benefit that they would have hoped for, that they can contact a medical practitioner and be prescribed, if appropriate, with medicinal cannabis product that contains THC as well. So I think that the key really to the success of this downscheduling process is education. So it's education of the public that they should not stop other medications before receiving, before consulting a healthcare practitioner and receiving benefit for the CBD oil, the drug interactions and the side effects possible, the products that are available, and the fact that really, I really do believe that for optimal management, they do need to see a healthcare practitioner to support them, even if they can obtain the product behind the counter. All right, so that concludes my bit. I'll stop my share.
Thank you very much, Orit. So our final speaker tonight, I've got the pleasure of introducing Rhys Cohen. I've worked with Rhys on a number of non-commercial education projects. He is a cannabis economist. I'm not sure if you still like to call yourself that. He'll correct me if he doesn't. Rhys is from Freshleaf Analytics and is going to be presenting to you shortly when it comes online.
Yeah, hi everybody. So my name's Rhys Cohen. I'm the principal consultant at Freshleaf Analytics, and I am a commercial consultant and policy and politics nerd, basically. So, thanks to everyone who's spoken tonight. I think that's given a really interesting overview and summary of the sort of clinical and medical side of this proposed rescheduling. There are some, I'd like to take a few minutes, if I can, to explain to you the sequence of events, how this is going to happen, when things are going to happen, and what might transpire as a result of this process. So at the moment, what's happened is the Department of Health has made a proposal to the Therapeutic Goods Administration, and they've proposed that the drug schedules be amended to create this new low-dose Schedule 3 CBD entry, and Paul and the others have gone through, and we know what that looks like in terms of what they've proposed. So now the Advisory Committee on Medicines Scheduling, that is the body that makes these decisions, is considering what should be done, essentially. So they were inviting the public and the general public to make submissions to them, giving them their thoughts about what should be done. That window closed on Friday, I believe, was the deadline for submissions. So now they're going to go away, digest that information, and come back with some interim decisions. So these will come out in September. And then there'll be another round of public consultations, followed by a final decision that'll be made available in November. And any decisions that are finalized in November will then be implemented on February 1st, 2021. So in terms of, when we might see this rescheduling happen, it'll be February 1st, 2021 is when the law will actually get changed. Now, that doesn't mean that on February 1st, 2021, you will be able to go to your pharmacist and buy CBD. For example, medical cannabis was legalized in 2016 in Australia, and that meant that cannabis moved from Schedule 9 to Schedule 8. So cannabis including THC and everything except pure CBD, right? Moved from Schedule 9 to Schedule 8. Since then, the only way in which Australians have been able to access most cannabis medicines is through these special access schemes and authorized prescriber schemes. So these are access schemes that are designed for people to access unapproved products. These are products that haven't been assessed for efficacy, that haven't been demonstrated or proven to be effective for treating anything necessarily. Although, obviously, medical cannabis has some medical benefit, we know this. So the same thing is going to happen with CBD. The downscheduling, if it happens, will happen. And then it'll be up to CBD companies or cannabis companies or product companies to get their Schedule 3 low-dose CBD product registered on the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods. It's only once a product has been registered on the ARTG that you'll be able to walk into a pharmacy, speak to the pharmacist, and purchase that product. So the rescheduling is one process in and of itself that is going to take a while, and it is not a done deal yet. We're still not certain what that will look like at the end of the day. But the next big hurdle is drug registration, and that's a huge challenge. That's probably a bigger challenge, I would say, than the rescheduling, because on top of all of the normal drug registration documents and work that companies will need to do to support their registration application. So that's things like, toxicology studies, a well-characterized product. We've run, proper benchtop tests on it. We know what it looks like. It's free from contaminants. It's stable at room temperature, that kind of stuff. They'll also need to prove to the TGA that their product is effective for treating a specific symptom or condition. And they'll need to prove that to such an extent that the TGA goes, yeah, I reckon it does do that. I think you're right. And your product can be made available in pharmacies for people to buy. So what kind of clinical evidence might be required? What level of clinical evidence might be required is uncertain. Will the TGA say you must run a double-blind randomized control trial with 500 participants in order to convince us that your product is effective enough to be sold in pharmacies? They might not. They might be open to observational data or a literature-based submission based on the knowledge that we have of CBD's efficacy already that's in the public domain. There's questions around, will 60 milligrams of what is essentially purified CBD, will 60 milligrams of purified CBD produce a meaningful clinical effect? Is it actually any good at doing anything for anybody? This is also an open question. Very few clinical trials have been run on low dose CBD. A few clinical trials have been run on high dose CBD, but usually, as I say, in high doses, we're talking hundreds of milligrams per day, as opposed to 60. And also there are those are clinical trials that are run on very serious medical conditions, refractory anxiety, pediatric epilepsy. Those aren't the sorts of conditions that you would get a pharmacist-only medicine to treat. So when we're thinking about pharmacist-only medicines, we're thinking about, you know, mild temporary anxiety, or mild temporary sleep disturbances, or mild temporary pain. This won't be something that people with Dravet syndrome or another serious condition would go to their pharmacist to get access to. Those people would still go to their doctors. So I guess the takeaway here is this is exciting, it's promising, and it's a step in the right direction, but it's very far from a done deal. Of course, there's a lot of work to do for me. At the moment, we're starting work with a few clients at the moment, helping them navigate this process. Thankfully, our sister company is a clinical research organization, so we're well placed to do it. But yeah, it'll be a long road ahead. Yeah, but I think that's probably it from me, and we can throw to some questions perhaps, Paul.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Rhys. And to all our panelists tonight, it's been really, really interesting. I'm just going to throw it open to panel-style questions. If you can, please use the Q&A button, not the chat function. Everyone's back in the room. Good to go. I'm just going to start at the top and work. We've had a bunch of questions. First one, has CBD been tested for Raynaud's syndrome? Orit, would you care to answer that one?
I'm not aware. I mean, it's possible that it hasn't. I just don't. I'm not familiar with the study, but I'm not aware of any specific testing for Raynaud's syndrome.
And you may as well answer the next one. Do you find low doses of CBD, less than 60 milligrams per day, effective for insomnia?
So personally, because I do have access for the application for formulations that do contain THC as well. For insomnia, I usually prescribe either equal THC to CBD, or at least a ratio of 1:20, which I do find effective for insomnia. However, there are studies where CBD in less than a dose of 60 milligram was used and did find benefit on sleep. And definitely, CBD can be alerting when it's used in a dose that is lower than 10 milligrams, but can actually improve sleep on a dose that is higher than that. So definitely there is the potential beneficial.
Is anyone else got anything to answer for either of those? I've got to throw to you next for the next two questions, Rhys. So the next two questions, they both asked a similar thing. What level of evidence efficacy will be required for registration, and are all CBDs grown in Australia indicated for all the indications mentioned by the TGA? Specific clinical trials are not required for each indication, e.g. it does not matter which CBD available pharmacists might use.
Yeah, good. So interesting questions.
Yeah.
Perhaps I'll ask the second question first, just since it's now front of mind. So the only product in Australia, the only cannabis-based product in Australia that a doctor can prescribe in the same way that they can prescribe any other medication by simply writing a prescription for it, well, it's relatively straightforward. The only product is nabiximols, which is a GW pharmaceutical product, and it can only be prescribed for the treatment of muscle spasticity associated with multiple sclerosis. So as far as mainstream normal drug registered medicines that we're all usually used to go, that's it as far as cannabis-based medicines go. What is possible is for doctors to prescribe products that have not been assessed by the TGA as being effective. So these are products that maybe they're registered overseas and the company hasn't bothered to register those products in Australia. That's what the system was originally designed to do. But you can also now prescribe or request permission to prescribe unregistered medicines, including unregistered cannabis-based medicine. So when a doctor goes to prescribe an unregistered medicine, usually they'll be using what's called the Special Access Scheme Category B pathway, which is a per patient approval. It's an online form that the doctor will fill in that goes to the Federal Health Department that explains the history of the patient and why they think this particular cannabis product that the doctor has nominated, why they think that's appropriate, and the dose they'll give it to them and what they'll do for monitoring and this, that, and the other. Then usually the TGA comes back and says, yep, you're good to go. And then the doctor writes the prescription and things move on from there. So in terms of, which drugs have been approved for what in Australia, it's just nabiximols only for the treatment of muscle spasticity associated with people who have multiple sclerosis. Mm-hmm. Anything outside of that is done, we're talking about unregistered medicines, and every unregistered medicine is treated essentially on a case-by-case basis. So hopefully that answers the second question. Paul, I've actually now forgotten the first question. Would you mind jogging my memory?
I think you pretty much covered. We've got loads of questions. We've actually got to move on, but it's about the level of evidence efficacy will be required for registration, and I think it's something unknown. It's something that TGA are going to be developing over time.
It's super interesting though, because on the evidence thing, because usually what happens is drugs get registered, and maybe they get registered as a Schedule 4 or a Schedule 8, and then that company who owns that drug, usually what happens is then they put in an application to the TGA to say, actually, that Schedule 4 drug that I've got, I reckon it should be Schedule 3, and here's why. There's almost no examples in the history of Australian pharmaceutical regulations of a brand new product being registered first as a Schedule 3. It almost never happens. So this is untrodden ground, largely, both for the regulators and for industry, which is another part of the challenge.
I think they want it to happen, which is why they proposed the amendment, and well, nothing's a foregone conclusion. I think there's support of the government there, and for the reasons I gave in my presentation. But our next question is easy, does CBD show up on police drug testing? Big no from me.
Same.
No from all our panelists?
Yeah.
Only THC, I believe, is tested in roadside drug tests. That's a topic for a whole nother webinar. I can speak for about an hour.
If you're accessing a CBD product that's not prescribed by your doctor, then it's possible that it could contain THC in it. So be cautious.
Yeah. In trace amounts, but whether it's detectable or not, I'm of the opinion it's not.
Yeah. Well, if it's an unregulated product, then it could have anything in it, is my point.
Yeah, I agree on that as well.
On that note, I do know someone who got breathalyzed after drinking lemon lime bitters all night and blew above, because they drank so many of them that their lemon lime bitters has got a trace amount of alcohol in it. Here's one for Orit. Is there a list available for authorised, those to authorise prescribed CBD doctors?
Is there a list
of authorised prescribers available?
A list of authorised, the actual name of the doctor?
Yeah.
Any medical practitioner can prescribe medicinal cannabis. You don't have to be an authorized prescriber. That is just one pathway. The other pathway is the SASB application through the TGA, and any medical practitioner can do that. So any medical practitioner can apply for approval of prescription of medicinal cannabis.
Yep. Next question, can we have live case studies related to the subject for other countries like US or Canada with regards to down scheduling of CBD? I'll start answering this, and I'll throw it over to the panel, but US are federally illegal for cannabis. They cannot easily do research. Australia's in a unique situation for this. Canada's a different kettle of fish. They've done a lot of research, but I think Australia's done it right, and our government promotes medical research. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening. I'll throw it open to everyone else to comment on. I've answered it. Should we move on?
Sorry.
So next question. I wonder where this question was leading. My body loves being massaged in hemp oil for pain management. I'm curious about what's being done in the collaboration space between hemp and CBD.
Well, I mean, hemp is a type of cannabis plant, and CBD can be extracted from hemp. So in the United States, for example, and in China, that's where a large amount of the CBD that's used in those countries come from, is actually from industrial hemp cultivation. In Australia, we're allowed to cultivate hemp, and we're allowed to eat hemp products now that don't contain cannabinoids, but it's not yet possible for us to, or allowed for us to extract CBD from industrial hemp crops. You can only extract CBD from plants that have been cultivated under a medicinal cannabis license, which is a lot more sort of difficult and expensive. But, you know, it's kind of a weird situation at the moment, because we've got products now in Australia that are made from hemp-derived CBD overseas, and yet our own hemp cultivation facilities in Australia can't be used for the same purpose.
Yep. Next question. Sorry, Rhys, you're getting airtime here, which is awesome. Generally speaking, how long does it take to list a drug on the RTG? How long's a piece of string?
Like the registration process itself, I think, is estimated to take, I think, like 9 months. I can't really recall, but that's assuming that everything works perfectly and that you've already done all of the hard work beforehand. So the registration process itself is the easiest part of it. The hardest part is getting everything ready to submit to the regulators, which, you know, can take many years for some drug companies.
Yeah. Next question. Will hemp companies from the USA be able to send hemp-derived CBD products to Australia and meet the Schedule 3 medicine threshold?
They are already sending products, unregistered products, to Australia, which are unregistered medicines. So in theory, it may be possible for registered Schedule 3 products to use hemp-derived CBD as an ingredient. I'm not sure. It would depend on the quality standards that are being used in the cultivation facility
as well. Next question for Orit. Does the TGA want to approve low-dose CBD for anxiety and sleep only?
So my understanding from the TGA submission is that the low dose, the proposition is to approve it for chronic pain, anxiety, and insomnia. That is my understanding.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. I guess because of its anti-inflammatory properties as well. Potential is there over the counter.
I guess there isn't a huge amount of studies that have been done using low dose of CBD, which is why the indications at the moment are quite limited. I would think that if the down scheduling would be to occur, then there will be many more studies that will be done in the field, and possibly indications will be added to these lists.
It may be like being available on prescription that you can have it. It doesn't off-label for the symptoms, including you don't have to necessarily. If it's over the counter, then it's over the counter. You don't necessarily need to. You need to satisfy the pharmacist or the gatekeeper involved. So the next question: does the source plant of CBD matter, hemp versus cannabis?
Depends what you mean by matter. Depends what you're trying to do with it. That's a tricky question. Sorry.
I reading between the lines, someone's trying to get around the licensing, i.e. having a industrial hemp license which is much cheaper compared to a medical grow.
I had a similar question, real life, the other day with whether it was an indica or a sativa as a species, which we get quite a lot. So it's a similar idea between hemp and cannabis. It's a species of plants. You're deriving the compounds. You might not just be deriving one compound, which is also important because all the other ones help sometimes the effect. But it's a common question we get.
But I guess for a 98% pure CBD product, it would be functionally, it would be irrelevant what the other 2% was constituted of or where it came from, right? Like CBD is chemically identical, whether it's made in a lab, extracted from a hemp plant or a cannabis plant. It's the same chemical.
Yeah.
So we got another 5 minutes per question. So we're going to finish on time. We'll try and smash through as many as we can. Next question is really, really interesting. CBD is used for sport athletes in the USA, etc., to aid in muscle recovery, etc. Would trials be needed in Australia for this use?
Yes. Any use that you want to use a medicine for will require a clinical trial on that specific indication for a drug to be registered.
I'd love to
and
see
made available to describe. Yeah.
I've heard so many testimonials from sports stars that literally get beaten up every weekend in Super Bowl or ice hockey, and they tell this amazing story that they were addicted to opioids and not doing very well. And but once again, I'd like to see the study comparing cannabis to recovery. Next one, question for Rhys. With potential changes to CBD scheduling, can we see more companies importing GMP-approved cannabis material, CBD?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, with the increase in prescribing unregistered medicines, we're seeing more and more volumes being imported to Australia. I think, you know, by the time this all works itself out, we'll have a pretty decent domestic cultivation operation as well. And you know, one of the benefits of doing that would be you'd have control over the supply chain. So you wouldn't need to trust or rely on some overseas cultivator, you know, that they are definitely, you know, GACP or you know, that they adhere to the quality standards that you need to adhere to. I think there would be a strong benefit to that for companies to use locally cultivated material.
Okay. Next question is one we get asked all the time. Curious about the costs of over-the-counter CBD. I've heard of people here in Perth paying in excess of $450 per script. Will it eventually be available on the PBS?
Well, the only drugs that can be considered for PBS subsidies are registered drugs. So you need to get your drug, first of all, you need to have a low-dose drug, a low-dose category of medicines scheduled appropriately. Then you need to register a specific drug that treats a specific indication. Then you can apply to the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Council to see if they would subsidize your medicine specifically. So for example, nabiximols, that the only registered cannabis medicine in Australia, that was put forward to the Pharmaceutical Benefits Advisory Committee, you know, to say, hey, you know, maybe you should subsidize this for muscle spasticity associated with MS. And they said, sorry, the cost benefit analysis doesn't stack up. It's too expensive. We're not going to subsidize it. So probably not for a long time would be the answer to that question.
Do you have any brief comment, Dunja or Orit?
I think from experience with the products as well, CBD to extract seems to be more expensive by itself. But yeah, like Rhys said, hopefully eventually over time the price would hopefully drop as well with the competition, I guess. So yeah. But for pharmacists, I think it's good to know that it will remain as private scripts for a while. So
and I'm sure you'll have observed this in your practice, but you know, over the last year or so, you know, we have seen prices for prescribed products in Australia continue to decline. So hopefully that continues.
Yeah.
A lot lower. Yeah, they're certainly a lot lower than those prices quoted already. That price is ancient history. If you're paying that, you're paying way too much. Another question for Rhys. If CBD is rescheduled, how long do you think it would take roughly for companies to get their products registered for the OTC market, including time required for testing studies?
I mean, good question. It depends on how early they start, and it depends on what additional clinical research is required by the TGA to pursue registration. And then, of course, we're assuming that whatever clinical research is conducted produces the outcomes that those companies are looking for. That's not a given either. With the companies that we're having conversations with at the moment, we're recommending that we start work right now, even before the interim decisions are released, to get a head start on this. Because the earlier you enter the market, the greater market share you capture, the better you do business. In our current very rough timescales, I think from today we're looking at something like close to 2 years from now before drugs actually get in the hands of consumers.
We got time for one more question. It's a really great question by James Vosper, who's associated with the hemp industry. Hi, James. Is this rescheduling enough to meet demand? For example, 4.2 million Australians received a prescription for a mental health issue in 2019.
I mean, probably not. Like, I would safely assume that at least 5% of Australians have already used an unregulated illegal CBD product that they've probably bought online. We know in the UK it's up around 10%. In the US it's about 17% of adults have already used an unregulated CBD product. So, whether that's appropriate or not, I can't really say, but the demand is there and it's only going to grow.
Yep. Well, that's all we've got time for tonight. So thank you so much for the panelists. I will try and answer some of the questions in writing that we've got there waiting. But yeah, thank you to everyone watching at home around the world, and for the panelists. So thank you so much for being a part of this. And if anyone is available in 3 weeks' time, we're running one on the referendum in New Zealand, which will be super interesting. So thanks everybody. Thanks. Have a very good night.
Enjoy your evenings. Bye then.
Bye.